I want to read you the opening lines of a couple fundraising texts I got. These are mostly real, but some may be made up, and I want to see if you can spot the fake one.
Sure.
Family, it's Cory Booker. It's 1. 2, we're about to shock Susan Collins. 3, Tommy, I'm gay and I need your help. 4, and this one I believe is supposed to be sung. Lately, I've been losing sleep about the future of our country, Tommy. Number 5, friend, I don't mean to sound dramatic, but our democracy is about to burn to the fucking ground. My ass is literally on fire, RN. This is Chuck Schumer, by the way. Which of those do you think is real? Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm Tommy Vietor, and this episode is about something everyone hates: fundraising emails and fundraising texts. Even if you've made only one political donation in your life, your contact information can get thrown into some database that leads to endless streams of unhinged fundraising solicitations. But this problem is bigger than it just being kind of weird when Hakeem Jeffries won't stop sending you selfies. It could actually undermine one of the few advantages that Democrats have over Republicans, which is grassroots fundraising success. In 2024, Kamala Harris raised about 40% of her money from small dollar donors, while Trump raised less than 29% of his. And according to an analysis by the Center for Campaign Innovation, in the first 3 months of 2025, House Democrats have raised about twice as much on average from donors giving under $200. And the Democratic Party's advantage with small dollar donors is even bigger over in the Senate. But if we drive those donors away by annoying them, or worse, by exploiting them, that fundraising advantage will evaporate. So in today's episode, I'm going to explore the world of online fundraising, how it got so bad, why texting stop never seems to make the messages stop, the political risks for the Democratic Party, and the critical role that Act Blue plays in our fundraising success, and how Republicans are trying to destroy it. You're going to hear from 3 experts in this digital media world: Crooked Media's own Dan Pfeiffer, Regina Wallace-Jones, the CEO of Act Blue, and Joe Rospars, the CEO of Blue State Digital and a longtime digital strategist. We're going to start with my conversation with Joe about how online fundraising has evolved, the explosion of awful fundraising texts, and what a better approach to small dollar fundraising could look like. So Joe, you've worked for a bunch of different candidates: Howard Dean, Barack Obama, Elizabeth Warren. How has your job evolved over time, the job of a digital strategist?
Well, increasingly, the job of the digital strategist is more and more parts of the campaign. So when we first worked together back in 2007 for Barack Obama, we really had to have 3 brains, right? You would have morning with the comms team, you'd have afternoon with the field organizers and political folks, and then in the evening, you'd be chasing the finance folks to be handling the grassroots part of it. And so I think the job now is actually the whole campaign, right?
Yeah.
So I think I was the first one to be chief strategist for a campaign, like coming from a digital background for Warren in 2020. And what we've seen is that the model for the organization of the campaign has changed as every part of the campaign has become digital.
It's funny to think that I think your job title was like head of new media. Right now it's just media. That's the whole ball game. Yeah. Do you have a sense generally of how much money Democratic campaigns are raising from big donors versus grassroots online fundraising these days?
It depends on the campaign. Like safe incumbents will have, their sort of rounds of checks that come in. There are different candidates and campaigns that are almost exclusively grassroots based. And that's something that candidates can change as they move up the ladder, run for different levels of office. So, for presidential campaigns in 2020, Elizabeth Warren decided not to spend time selling access to the candidate, right? So not calling rich people on the phone or having private big donor events to fund the primary campaign. And that was something that was a risk at the time, but she was able to become the fastest candidate, first-time presidential candidate ever to get to 1 million donors by focusing on the grassroots. And so even when it's tough, you're in a competitive primary, you can make these choices, but also donors reward the choices that you make about how you raise your money.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that was true for Obama in 2008. We didn't take any PAC money, any lobbyist money. People thought that might be stupid or risky, but I think the messaging that comes with that kind of, let's be honest, like bare minimum campaign finance step you can take personally is pretty important. So the big question behind this episode is, why the hell am I getting so many text messages from candidates, and why can't I get them to stop? So I was hoping to start with some basics. So when I donate to a candidate, what happens with my data?
Unfortunately, the answer depends, right? Because your data is you've signed up, right, for the campaign's email list. If you gave your phone number, you're probably going to get SMS from them. But a campaign, especially one that loses, or for a candidate who's not going to be running for office anytime soon again, your data turns into a way to retire campaign debt and for consultants to sell it on to the next person.
So basically, the campaigns can log your data, put it into a file, and then sell that to other political candidates, or I guess PACs or organizations.
Yep.
I think that's the part that frustrates people, because you end up getting these fundraising texts from candidates you've never heard of, from PACs you've never heard of or never given to. Is it also getting scraped from FEC data or information that we sort of put into the system writ large when we just vote or register to vote?
In theory, you're not supposed to scrape the FEC data in order to do fundraising. Whether the FEC data gets scraped by a voter file company, gets passed on and reformatted into some, the data finds its way to places and for purposes that's not really the intention. But it's also just campaigns straight up making their data available to a brokerage of likely donor, likely Democratic supporter, et cetera, data. And so it's the model where, unfortunately, where we are right now is that the digital experience of email and SMS has the market around your data has come to look like the direct mail market, where there are just these lists being passed around by different shops, and people just blast away at it. And so the consulting firm or the mail house or data firm makes money, and you get bombarded with lots of texts and emails, and they don't even really need it to have a high response rate, right? As long as you get a couple, it's cheap to do, and then you're off to the races and doing this thing. The problem with it, though, is that obviously it's a terrible experience for the end user of the donors, and it doesn't actually build a good file for your campaign, because you might have somebody respond, to an initial message, but if they're not in your district, they're not following your race, they're not actually part of a community that you're building around your campaign, they're not likely to give again. And what happens is that even donations that you get in that first sort of wave of a mass of prospecting, you wind up, with a lot of unsubscribes, with a lot of people who don't ever give again.
Right. And I guess that's probably why it feels like to a lot of people, you can reply stop every day for the rest of your life, and you're still going to remain on some list, probably because your data is just getting sold over and over and over again.
Yeah, you're replying stop to that campaign, and usually they'll follow your request to stop. But the consultant that put your data in that campaign's file is obviously not going to stop.
Can you explain what a scam pack is and how it works?
Yeah, so there are operatives who run shops that produce mail or digital services or technology or data, and they set up PACs that look like they're going to do something, right, to help Democrats win, or this kind of Democrat, or fight on this issue. And really what happens is it becomes a self-licking ice cream cone for the consultant. So it's raising money, but spending basically all of its money on raising the money for the consultants and operatives who set it up.
You're right.
It's really awful.
And also, I mean, I think there have been instances, I believe, of candidates who basically seemed like their entire campaign was predicated on, running against Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, or some Republican in like an R+30 district. And then this person runs and they raise a ton of money online, and you come to realize that, actually, that money is going into, let's say, a marketing firm that they actually own and operate.
Yeah, there are cases where that's the candidate. There are cases, though, also where the candidate is making choices to run a very high overhead fundraising program that not every candidate needs to or should be an expert in fundraising practices, but a lot of times you can have campaigns that get taken for a ride and wind up paying a considerable portion of their overhead to the consultants.
Can you explain what peer-to-peer texting is, and whether you think that has contributed to this increase in text message fundraising requests?
Peer-to-peer texting is when you have a group of volunteers right, who you are willing to do something for you, you provide them a software tool where they can log in and send pre-filled out texts to a pre-selected list of voters or prospective donors or whatever that is. And it is something that, like if a campaign doesn't want to necessarily get tagged, or an organization doesn't necessarily want to get tagged with you knowing where the where the message is coming from per se, or if they are engaged in practices around the lists that they've uploaded that wouldn't pass muster for the text that they send from their short code, like their 5-digit number that is the official campaign thing, you might find that in peer-to-peer text. Peer-to-peer text came up as an organizing tool to help voters reach out to people in their community or people that they knew, and is definitely a key part of running a big grassroots campaign. But in the hands of grifty operatives, it can also be a key part of why you're getting bombarded so badly.
And I think that's what's so frustrating about this, right? Is because I think peer-to-peer texting or text-based communications started as a really great way to remind people to vote or to get registered to vote. And now it's being taken over by this fundraising piece of the political pie, and it feels like it's ruining it.
Yeah, and maybe I'm just old school, but our clients and campaigns and organizations we work with at Blue State don't send unsolicited SMS or email. It's just not the way to build a strong, healthy program over the long period. And the biggest, most successful programs over long periods of time don't engage in these practices.
Yeah. I want to read you the opening lines of a couple fundraising texts I got. These are mostly real, but some may be made up, and I want to see if you can spot the fake one.
Sure.
Family, it's Cory Booker. It's 1. 2, we're about to shock Susan Collins. 3, Tommy, I'm gay and I need your help. 4, and this one I believe is supposed to be sung. Lately, I've been losing sleep about the future of our country, Tommy. Number 5, friend, I don't mean to sound dramatic, but our democracy is about to burn to the fucking ground. My ass is literally on fire, RN. This is Chuck Schumer, by the way. Which of those do you think is real?
I think a lot of people would love to have that level of energy from our Senate Democratic leader, but I think the last one is probably the bogus one.
Yeah, you nailed it. Why do they include these creepy photos? Why is the tone so completely unhinged? Like, is that effective?
I mean, if you think about the version on the Republican side, right? On the Republican side, the grassroots fundraising is distilled to its most grifty concentrate because they just don't need that money, right? Like the Republican financing operation is so brazenly corrupt that all of the grassroots fundraising is really just about tricking older folks into entering their credit card information that is being auto charged every month and they don't know or check.
Right.
And that's the end state of where it's going, right? For these kind of messages that you're seeing. And so it's both a annoyance and it makes the fundraising harder for people that are trying to do fundraising for important races and meaningful causes. But it's also just a content problem, right? Like people's perception of what the political conversation is, what democratic messaging is, what is important and needs to be emphasized and lifted up is all distorted by whatever the 0.0001 response rate ticking up to, adding a 1,000% to that.
Right. What's a little bit more effective? Do you think the candidates themselves have become aware of how much people hate these messages and how much they annoy them?
I think people say things to candidates about the email and SMS that they get. Yep. But the reality is that unless it's a presidential campaign, you as a candidate likely won't encounter most of the people getting these messages because like I get all these messages and none of them are for anybody running in my district or usually even in my state. And so you're not going to bump into these people unless you're on a plane or something, right? You're not going to bump into any of the people who your campaign is aggravating.
Yeah. So the annoyance we all feel with fundraising texts used to be the annoyance we all felt with fundraising emails. Is that the email issue abated because of spam filters becoming so effective? I just feel like people it's like I don't even notice them anymore.
Yeah, the email inbox is a more regulated place, right? By Gmail or by, whatever other service you use. And so things get sorted out. There's also still an ongoing war around deliverability. And so the more of these bad practices that you engage in email, the worse your email will perform in terms of getting to the people who actually signed up and want it. And so there is a kind of balance to the economy of how email works, even though people are still doing a bunch of these practices, especially in the scam pack and like organizational area.
So, I mean, when I press people, friends who have worked on campaigns or people at the DNC on this issue, they're like, we know these messages suck. They're annoying. But one of the only advantages we have as Democrats is a better grassroots fundraising program and base. And if the money from these text-based messages went away, we would have less resources. We'd lose campaigns, so like they feel like they're kind of stuck. Is that bullshit?
Yeah, it's pretty much bullshit. The cost of doing business in the bad way is higher than doing business the right way and building your campaign and your organization from the bottom up ethically with consent and people opting in. And the idea that that we have to do things that people hate in order to run campaigns is not limited to fundraising, right? And it's really toxic and something that needs to go. Like, we don't have to make shitty TV ads that people hate. We don't have to have organizational cultures run by really aggro, awful people managers with a bunch of HR problems in campaign organizations. There are lots of things about campaigns that people excuse in the name of winning or fundraising or whatever. And I think there are enough examples now, going back to us piloting certain things with Obama, Warren, Bernie, AOC, others, that you really can make different choices and have a campaign be something good that people enjoy their experience with. And by the way, that's better for the brand, right? That's better for the party. That's better for the organization that you're building. That's better for the campaign organization that will be left over when the campaign is over. Because too often a campaign, especially presidential campaigns, you wind up, whether you win or lose, it's still just an empty parking lot full of garbage, right? That the carnival left town. And if you're trying to actually build a relationship with people who want to do something, who want to help you govern, who want to help you get other people elected like them, that's a much more powerful thing politically to do. And also, it helps that you are most able to do that by doing it the right way.
I like the metaphor of a parking lot full of garbage after a carnival is an excellent one for a losing campaign. People listening are probably like, okay, I'm angry. Who should I be mad at? Who are these consultants? Is it a bunch of them? Is it a few bad actors? Like, how do we think about that?
There are a few actors that are the worst, but unfortunately, it's quite prevalent. Like there's very few of us like Blue State who are not engaged in these practices and trying to help campaigns build for the long term, build the right way, campaigns and organizations and party committees and things like that. And so, I would give the campaigns that you care about the feedback when they are treating you in a way that you don't like. But also, I think there's room here for some institution or a media outlet or organization to assign itself the task of basically consumer protection here, right? If some party committee or media outlet decided that they wanted to solicit all of the complaints for unsolicited text messages and emails and stuff that grassroots donors on the Democratic side are receiving, you could report out like the worst actors on a campaign basis. You could go do the investigation to find out what vendors they're paying that result in these massive spikes in complaints. So I think there is a way to get at this that doesn't require like government intervention or the DNC shutting people off of the voter file or whatever. I think surfacing it and making it a little bit more transparent, would help campaigns and organizations make better decisions.
That is a really good idea. And I think you speak to the need for someone who really knows what they're doing to kind of vet these things, because you get all these requests and you try to sometimes I'll get a forward from my father-in-law, who's like a great human being, a great Democrat. He'll be like, should I donate to this thing? And I'll try to run it down for him. And it takes me forever. You go to a website, I go to the FEC page, I try to Google the people associated with it. It's almost impossible to actually vet a lot of these PACs and organizations that are just bombarding people.
Yeah. And I think it would be a great service to grassroots donors everywhere to just aggregate where people are seeing these spikes in complaints and these activities, to the point where if you actually had it wired up and enough people bought into that, you would actually see things happen in real time and maybe be able to stop them and call it out.
What's sort of the gist of a better way to run a railroad that raises money and like resources candidates appropriately, but doesn't feel annoying or at worst predatory?
Yeah, you don't have to just sit around and wait for people to come to your website and sign up for your email or SMS, right? Like there is paid media, right? And that's something where if you invest in, and by the way, good for the brand, good for everybody, invest in progressive and democratic media outlets and invest in the sponsorship of content that aligns with your worldview, that's where your potential donors are, right? So there are ways to go out into the media environment in so many ways and so many platforms, investing in organizations of all sizes, from the Guardian US, where my wife works, but like down to individual creators who are just trying to sponsor their ability to do that work part-time on top of whatever else they do. There are lots of places to go to find the people you want to give to your campaign, and frankly better ways to make a connection with them than an unsolicited message that's annoying them at the dinner table.
Pod Save America is brought to you by Smalls. Is your cat having digestive issues?
Or are you just happy to see me?
Throwing up their food, or is your cat simply in need of a diet upgrade? If so, you should check out our newest sponsor, Smalls. Smalls cat food is protein-packed recipes made with preservative-free ingredients you'd find in your fridge, and it's delivered right to your door. That's why Cats.com named Smalls their best overall cat food. To get 35% off plus an additional 50% off your first order, head to Smalls.com and use our promo code CROOKED for a limited time only. Here's a review from a real Smalls customer. Elizabeth C. said, "My cat was always so-so with her usual food, but she's very enthusiastic about Smalls. Her breath is much better, and she poops much less frequently, and it does not smell disgusting like it used to." Congrats, Elizabeth C. Smalls was started back in 2017 by a couple of guys home cooking cat food in small batches for their friends. A few short years later, they've served millions of meals to cats across the U.S. Plus, Smalls works with the Humane World for Animals. They've donated over $1 million worth of food to help cats through the Humane World for Animals, and they even give you a chance to donate at checkout, whether you donate $5 for flea and tick medications or $7 for vaccines. And now you can add other cat favorites like amazing treats and snacks to your Smalls orders. After switching to Smalls, 88% of cat owners reported overall health improvements. That's a big deal. The team at Smalls is so confident your cat will love their product that you can try it risk-free. That means they will refund you if your cat won't eat their food. What are you waiting for? Give your cat the food they deserve for a limited time only. Because you're a Pod Save America listener, you can get 35% off Smalls plus an additional 50% off your first order by using our code CROOKED. That's an additional 50% off when you head to Smalls.com and use promo code CROOKED. Again, that's promo code CROOKED for an additional 50% off your first order plus free shipping at Smalls.com. Today's episode is sponsored by Acorns. What's the best piece of money advice you ever got? Put it in the mattress.
Put it,
Nope,
right?
That's
No,
not it.
that's not it. That's not it. That's
I got
not
good
it.
advice when I was working in the Senate. You know how we had those accounts?
The thrift
TSP,
savings account.
Thrift savings, yeah. And I wasn't doing the maximum. And our pal Tommy Vietor and Robert Gibbs were like, "You're an idiot.
Yeah.
What are you
gotta do
doing?"
the maximum.
And I was like, "Well, it seems like a lot of money now." And then, but you know what? It's good to do that.
I was putting money into the thrift savings account, but I forgot to actually invest it. So it was just sitting in cash. And then the whole economy crashed in 2007 due to the financial crisis. And then the Congress refused to pass TARP, remember?
Mm-hmm.
And then the market went even further. And that was the day. I was like, do it now. My first dip.
Wow.
I bought that dip.
Look at that. Acorns is a financial wellness app that makes it easy to start saving and investing for your future. You don't need to be rich. Acorns let you get started with the spare money you've got right now, even if all you've got is spare change. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns recommends a diversified portfolio that can help you weather all the market's ups and downs. You just need to stick with it, and Acorns makes that easy too. Acorns automatically invests your money, giving it a chance to grow with time. It's important. Investing is important. You want
You gotta do
to...
Carefully, safely.
You just want to make your money work for you. You don't
That's
just
right.
want it sitting in a checking account
No.
somewhere.
You don't.
Sign up now and join the over 14 million all-time customers who've already saved and invested over $25 billion with Acorns. Head to acorns.com/crooked or download the Acorns app to get started. Paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 3 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/crooked.
Trump has directed the Department of Justice to investigate ActBlue, which is, the biggest fundraising platform for Democrats. How important do you think ActBlue is for the Democratic Party? And what do you think it would mean if, the DOJ made it go away somehow?
I think we have to say at the top of this that obviously any politically charged investigation is illegal and shouldn't happen and is awful and not something that we should accept as normal and discuss as like what are the politics outcomes for this. I feel, really a lot of sympathy for the folks who are putting in the hard work at ActBlue. It's essentially a public utility for Democratic campaigns, especially the campaigns that are the smallest and need to get their infrastructure up and going. It's a turnkey option for people who are just starting out their campaign to try to do anything in the electoral process. And it shouldn't be taken lightly that they're a target.
After the 2024 election, a bunch of Democratic operatives and fundraisers sent a letter to the leader of ActBlue demanding that they make some changes to the way their service worked. Like the biggest asks were getting rid of messages that trick donors into believing they were giving to an official party entity when they were not, or that their donation would be matched somehow by someone. Do you think that letter went far enough? And what responsibility do you think ActBlue has in this kind of conversation we're having about fundraising sucking for the end user?
Well, I think if you're going to be in the position where you are a public utility and for all intents and purposes kind of a monopoly on the thing, you have a different kind of level of responsiveness that you need to bring to the conversation when you're in a sense the only game in town. And so I think there's more stuff that they could be doing. I really hope that the investigation and illegal targeting of them is not so much of a distraction that all the other work isn't prioritized to help improve the ecosystem around Democratic campaigns and fundraising. But it's really up to all of us as donors to make sure that the organizations we give to are behaving ethically and rewarding those who do behave ethically. And then hopefully some actors around get together and help change the gravitational pull of this system a little bit as we go into the next cycles.
This might be a dumb question, but do you think it's possible for a campaign to raise too much money?
Yes. It is especially problematic when campaigns that are having a great moment and make decisions about their budget around the money that they're raising right now encounter a moment where that slows and you wind up chasing, right? And I think this is something that we've seen in different primaries and general elections over the last few cycles. And it's something where if you have internally given your fundraising team or your fundraising team has accepted a goal of X and they see that they're only going to get to 80% of X, a lot of campaigns don't have enough of a checks and balances on their strategy for fundraising and how it connects to their actual budget and money spent, that you wouldn't actually have people go out and try to spend $1.20 to raise $1 to hit a goal number.
Right.
And not that people would even necessarily do that intentionally, but just because of how you've instrumented your system of where you spend money to raise it, you are over predicting what the dollar you spend to bring in $1 of donation is going to be. And so you wind up holding the bag at the end. And so in a sense, you have spent too much money to raise too much money. You should have just settled for raising slightly less money.
That's a really good point. I bet a lot of people don't realize how much money gets spent in pursuit of fundraising. I guess a lot of listeners to this show, I bet like 90% of listeners to Pod Save America have given to a candidate at some point, and they just want to feel like that money is going to a good cause or being well spent or just like not getting abused in some way. Do you have advice for people about kind of like a couple best practices around donations to politics generally?
I think if you're talking about campaigns specifically, investing in the candidates who are giving their time to you is a good filter for me. So candidates who are spending time speaking with you and producing content for you that isn't asking you for money is an important part of the equation, right? And so if you see a candidate who's spending time engaging grassroots folks in ways that are about more than money and fundraising, that it's about organizing, that it's about policy, that it's about narrating what's going on in the campaign or what's going on in politics generally, those are the campaigns that usually are going to be good and in good places to go. I think also folks who are, building organization on the ground, like, it is not easy to be a field organizer, as you know from all these years ago. It is not a lucrative thing to go work on a campaign as an early job, or even as a job later in life if you're taking a break from whatever else you're doing. That the difference between being able to hire one more person to just scratch out like a good, busy work week for a campaign is such a big deal, and just not that much money in the scheme of things. And so folks who are hiring and doing real organizing on the ground, those are the campaigns that I would give the extra dollar to.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, and that's a reason to donate early, right? Because that money could be invested in hiring a field staff and not dumping money on TV ads that may or may not work.
Campaigns and candidates are living and dying by what they can predict they're going to be able to spend.
Yeah.
And so when you have these moments, even though it's not, it's an election year here in New Jersey, but even though it's not an election year, for Congress or for Senate yet, the sooner you give and the more times you give to a candidate that's doing something that you believe in, it's so much signal, right, to that campaign to invest more in what they're doing that got to you, that made you inspired, but also that to give them the confidence to build and hire that next organizer, or build out open one more campaign office in order to build out, earlier and better for the election that's going to be next year. So like sometimes it feels like you're sort of on the receiving end of like a kind of the bank teller, machine opens up and it's like, okay, here's this fundraising email, and then everybody goes away inside. But like, they're really watching and making decisions based on whether you gave today, how much you gave, how many times you get, like all that stuff is getting extrapolated by good campaigns to make their bets about how they can best win. So I would encourage everybody to, when you're feeling it, give to the folks you love.
Final question. Anything we should have asked you? Anything else you want to share?
No, I mean, the grift on the Republican side is like, I find that Democrats were often not talking enough about these things that are like fixable. And when we're engaged in our self-critique, it's a lot of Eeyore, things that aren't necessarily fixable and are just the way they are. So I think this is one where we can do things. We can see on the other side what it looks like when it's like really bad and there is no grassroots component to how campaigns are run or responsiveness to ordinary people. And so we should do some things and try to make this problem less of a problem.
Yeah, agreed. And it does feel fixable. And just to nail a point you were making about the grift on the Republican side, like I have this kind of faint memory of, I think, Donald Trump sending out an email ostensibly for like Herschel Walker, but 90% of the funds actually went to his PAC. And then sometimes you're automatically opted in for a recurring donation. And sometimes those recurring donations continue after Election Day. So it is just a shocking extraction of money, usually from their most elderly voters and supporters. So it is really, as gross as it can feel on our side, it is worse over there.
Yes, and there's data to back that up. Like I think there were consumer complaints like to the FEC and others. Like there's just so many more on the Republican side, and that's bad. That's bad too, right? Yeah. I guess I don't want them to be more effective grassroots fundraisers, but we have a ways to go before it's quite as bad as them. But we should fix what we can.
Yeah, I don't want them to be more effective at raising money, but I also I don't want broad swaths of the most committed political activists on both sides to feel like the entire system is a grift that is rigged against them and is like designed to harm them. I feel like that's just bad for our body politic and helps enable people like Donald Trump. Joe, thank you so much for doing this. This is fascinating. I'm really grateful.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be here.
Okay, we'll be right back with my conversation with Dan. But as you guys know, we are trying to build an independent, progressive media company. And the best way you can support our work is by subscribing to the Friends of the Pod. Subscribers get tons of great perks. Just this month, they heard Dan Pfeiffer on Polar Coaster break down Trump's attempts to blame the economy on Joe Biden. On Inside 2024, Alyssa and Dan answered subscriber questions about Trump's first 100 days. And every Friday, subscribers get a much-needed break with Terminally Online, where crooked hosts and staff unpack the weirder shit on the internet in very unhinged, usually very funny ways. Plus, Friends of the Pod get access to exclusive AMAs with hosts like me, Jon Lovett, Aaron Ryan, Leah Littman. So go over to crooked.com/friends to learn more and subscribe today. Here's my conversation with Dan about his concern that these fundraising tactics are worse than just annoying, that they could actually hurt the Democratic Party. All right, Dan, so everybody hates fundraising emails. We hate fundraising texts. But you have said before that you think this is a bigger issue than it just being annoying, and that the fundraising tactics could actually hurt our candidates or the party itself. Why is that?
Well, I think it's important to sort of take a step back and recognize that how the process actually works on campaigns, right? Like every campaign exists only till election day. They care about nothing that happens after that. So they burn their list to the ground to reach they don't care. Because if you lose, your list is worth nothing. Right. And so if you win and you have to sort of rebuild trust with your list, that's a high class problem. And so they send more, all their goal is to reach their fundraising goal. And they get more desperate, more alarmist, and the hard part and more frequent, right? And they only think about the donors they're going to get. They never think about, it's not their job to think about the fact that the people who are on their list, either because they signed up or more likely because some firm they use bought their number from some other list or bought their email from some other list, are on 50 other lists or 100 other lists. And they're getting every email and every text. And you don't know, if you're just an average person, you don't have no idea which are from the DNC or Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or your member of Congress, and which are from some sketchy scam pack that's just trying to take your money. And so all you get the sense the Democratic Party writ large is just bombarding you with insane communications for money. And it dries out the list. It turns people off. They're trying to just like solve a specific problem. Like I'll give you an example. The DNC has had to raise money since the 2024 election. Because I was a monthly donor for a very long time to first the Biden and the Harris campaign, I have gotten in the months after the election, it's been a while since then, but the months after the election, I was repeatedly getting fundraising texts from Kamala Harris asking me to raise money for the DNC.
Wow. Yeah.
Like just think about how frustrating that is, like right after the party, because they have a budget goal and they're trying to reach it. What makes it even worse and even more complicated is you have fundraising consultants who get paid based on the amount of money they raise. In some cases, that usually doesn't happen with like a presidential campaign or anything like that, but with some of these smaller campaigns or some of these PACs. And so they're so aggressive, and it leaves a bad taste in everyone's mouth. I'm sure all the people in your life are constantly complaining to you. Is there anything you can do? When I was in the White House, people asked me all the time how they get off the list. Yeah. And they would show me emails and texts that weren't from Barack Obama or the DNC. They were from other groups. But because it's just a Democrat asking another Democrat for money, it wears bad on the whole party.
Yeah, and another piece of this is that, text-based communications is a great way to communicate with people because people actually open their texts and they read their texts. But we're only doing it with fundraising now. Like, what's a better way for campaigns to leverage that high open rate for a political advantage, do you think?
Well, I think the hard part is that we have really ruined the use of text. Was great for a brief period of time, and now it's been so abused that it's very hard to distinguish in your political text now what would be an ask to be a volunteer,
right,
or to show up to vote, because you're getting so many fundraising texts and you are trying to get off those lists. Like, and this is the collective action problem that exists in the fundraising space, which is you can use your list correctly. Bernie Sanders is great at his list. He asks them for money, informs them of things to do, asks them to do non-fundraising things a lot, like to go to this rally or volunteer, all of those things. But so he does a great job, but then there are all these other people doing a terrible job, and because there's a list overlap, it makes it hard. So if you're an individual candidate and you have a lot of people's phone numbers, that is a good way to tell them information. Like you could actually just tell them about things happening in Congress would be like a really great way. like John and I were just talking on the Friday pod about how people have no idea that Congress is about to vote to gut Medicaid to pay for tax cut for rich people. Like that text-based would be a way to do it. But when you're getting a zillion fundraising texts, it lowers the efficacy of that other way of using text-based communications.
Yeah, it makes you just assume that everything is just a solicitation. Last question for you. So I was talking to Joe Rospars earlier about whether he thought it was possible for a campaign to raise too much money. And he said, yes, especially if you're a campaign that is spending a lot of money to bring in money. It can become like a self-licking ice cream cone. Yeah. And it got me thinking about the Harris campaign and how they spent their roughly $1.5 billion they raised in 2024. The New York Times reported that Harris spent about $600 million producing and airing TV ads. There was the $900,000 they spent on the exterior of the Sphere in Las Vegas as sort of marketing effort at the end of the campaign. And, a lot of these things were perceived as being pretty ineffective, especially given the price tag. Do you think campaigns are putting too much time, money, and effort into fundraising at this point with diminishing returns for even the spend on those dollars?
I think not in local races and probably most House races. I think they have a certain amount of budget. It's hard to raise that money. They don't have huge grassroots lists that are just like pouring money in. They don't have huge bundlers who can do it. The big Senate races and the presidential campaigns probably are in some cases, spending too much time raising money. And I think you remember in 2020 when after Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, there was that massive flood of money into every Senate race in the last few weeks of the race. And there were the things that campaigns were spending money on is because especially when that money comes late. There's only so many things you can do with it. Right. Most of the TV ads are bought. You're buying TV ads where like 1/10 of the market of the reach gets into your state. It's right over the border, stuff like that. And I think, it does create when you have that much money, you sometimes make strange strategic decisions because you're not forced by the necessity of meeting a budget. Someone could argue that we had too much money at the end of the Obama campaign. We were buying ads in video games.
Right.
In 2008.
30-minute spots and stuff. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We bought 30-minute spots like we were selling like a blender on QVC. But there is this, like, I think what you're bringing up with the Harris campaign is you can spend money, especially if you're a national campaign, you can spend money to raise money, and you're spending a whole bunch of money and you're barely breaking even in some cases. And that's part of what's happening as these lists get burned to the ground is it's harder and harder to get people to give money. So you're spending more to go to more people.
Right.
There have been some efforts from some people who have, they put pressure on Act Blue and other groups, but this is something maybe the DNC could get involved, but we really do need party leaders to come together and work to try to set some set of rules around the frequency of fundraising texts and emails. Like, there could be, sort of maybe an equivalent of like Charity Navigator for these PACs so that people, because I got a text minutes after Ross Baraka was arrested from a group called Free Ross Baraka. I don't know what group is that. His campaign,
right?
Is that another group who just adopted? But there was no way to know until you entered the flow to actually donate the money to know who you were giving to. And there has to be all of the people who are doing right, which I think are a lot of the Democratic politicians are suffering because there are a lot of bad actors out there. So there should be some collective effort to try to police what's happening. And I think the whole party would raise more money and improve our standing with our base if we were to do that.
That's a really good idea. I mean, there's a couple of kind of actionable suggestions that have come out of this episode. One, I think you're right. The party leaders should come together and try to lay out some standards that everyone should be asked to follow. Two, some sort of Charity Navigator like platform will be really helpful because it's incredibly difficult to run down like the provenance of these PACs and see what's legit and what's not. And then three, Joe recommended that we keep a list and just name and shame all the worst actors, the campaigns or PACs or party entities that harass people the most.
Yeah.
Good
and
ideas.
The fundraising consultants. I think that's a great idea.
Great idea. Dan, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tommy.
After the break, you'll hear my conversation with Regina. But our friends over at Vote Save America would kill me if I didn't make clear that Vote Save America does not sell donor contact information, ever.
Pod Save America is brought to you by Quince. It's spring in Los Angeles, so that means one day it's cool, the next you're sweating through your clothes.
Boy, that's
Ain't
life.
it the truth? Ain't it the
That's
truth?
life.
It might be time to switch up your wardrobe, and Quince has exactly what you're looking for. Lighter layers, better fabrics, and prices that don't make you think twice. Quince has all the things you actually want to wear, like organic cotton silk polos, European linen beach shorts, and comfortable pants that work from everything from backyard hangs to nice dinners. The best part, everything with Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than what you'd find at similar brands. By working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middlemen, Quince gives you luxury pieces without the crazy markups. And Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. Got some of their t-shirts, got some of those European linen beach shorts a couple last month. They're great. Wear them all the time. Super comfy. Highly recommend. Elevate your closet with Quince. Go to quince.com/crooked for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/crooked to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/crooked. Pod Save America is brought to you by ZipRecruiter. You all know what speed dating is, right? Well, if you're the owner of a growing business, what if there was a feature like speed dating, only for hiring? In other words, you could meet several interested qualified candidates at once, all at a designated time. Well, good news, there is. It's Zip Intro from ZipRecruiter. You can post your job today and start talking to qualified candidates tomorrow. And right now, you can try Zip Intro for free at ZipRecruiter.com/crooked. Zip Intro gives you the power to quickly assess excellent candidates for your job via back-to-back video calls. You simply pick a time, and Zip Intro does all the work of finding and scheduling qualified candidates for you. Then you can choose who you want to talk to and meet with great people as soon as the next day. So easy. We love ZipRecruiter. We've used it the whole time we've had this company. It really helps sort through resumes and helps you hire faster, which is hiring is just always a pain in the ass, no matter what. And ZipRecruiter can really make it a lot easier. Enjoy the benefits of speed hiring with new Zip Intro, only from ZipRecruiter, rated #1 hiring site based on G2. Try Zip Intro for free. It's ZipRecruiter.com/crooked. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/crooked. Zip Intro. Post jobs today. Talk to qualified candidates tomorrow.
Throughout this episode, we've been talking about ActBlue. So we wanted to end it by talking with Regina Wallace-Jones, the CEO of ActBlue, about what they do and why Trump's attempts to destroy ActBlue could be so devastating for the Democratic Party.
My name is Regina Wallace-Jones. I'm the CEO and president of ActBlue.
And what is ActBlue?
ActBlue is a digital fundraising platform. We have existed since 2004. We give homage always to Howard Dean, who was one of the first to really demonstrate that a viable presidential campaign could be run with the strength of small dollar donors. And our vision at the time was that we could make that widely available to all candidates up and down the ticket. We have been executing on that mission for the last 21 years and are excited where we've landed now is a central juggernaut for the Democratic and progressive left. And that's where we love being, and that's where we want to stay.
What was the fundraising landscape or process like for Democrats before ActBlue came along?
So there would be basically two different kinds of candidates that were funded prior to an ActBlue. The first would be just a wealthy person, period, who may have financed largely all of their campaigns themselves and or among themselves and their friends. The other is, a candidate who is largely making a bid for larger donors to fund their campaign, which effectively means that substantially few people are making a decision about who has the fundraising momentum to really run a campaign, and that would be at the municipal level. It'd also be at the federal level, but the dollars get sort of more and more magnified the higher you move in the ticket. So ActBlue's perspective was that we really wanted to unlock the power of the grassroots, that the say of the many was way, way more powerful than one or a few. And so we set out at that point to really work from the bottom up. We did not start at the presidential. It actually wasn't until 2020 that all of the Democratic candidates for the president of the United States ran a small dollar campaign on ActBlue.
Yeah, so I worked for John Edwards for president in 2004. Yeah. And when you would walk around the fundraising department, there would be giant books filled with contact information for trial lawyers. So I remember the kind of OG fundraising and the types of people that it involved in the political process. And you're right. I mean, Howard Dean comes along and he starts this revolution in online fundraising. But at some point along the way, Act Blue just exploded in popularity and kind of became the only game in town. I'm just wondering, why do you think that was?
I think there's a couple of reasons for this. The first is Act Blue is really the only large entity, and certainly at the time, the only entity that was actually organized as a nonprofit. The second thing is we did, as I said, start from the ground up. So it was sort of a winning the trust of the ecosystem campaign by campaign, and demonstrating that consistently we were going to be there for the moment. If we think back to 2020, the moment when George Floyd was killed was a moment that exploded into movement around the world. And Act Blue was a central actor in that, helping to channel the dollars, the fundraising, and the frustrations in some way, but really with an intention to drive action, right? The death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, sort of the moment when many realized that reproductive rights were at risk and that we had not really put the right structural framework in place to make sure that that wasn't something that we would lose.
So, as you said, I mean, you're not a political party, you're not a political entity, you're not fundraising, you're a technology platform and conduit through which funds are raised and then distributed out. Is there a version of Act Blue on the Republican side that just happens to be used by Republicans, and how does it differ?
I am so glad that you asked that question. Actually, there is a product that was created in 2019. That product is called WinRed. And the structural model for WinRed is in many ways an exact replica of Act Blue. There are some key differences. One is that it was mandated from the top down. So whereas we started one campaign at a time from the ground up and did not get to the presidency until 2020, having been founded in 2004, WinRed was started as a mandate from the top down, where President Trump was the candidate that really drove the use of the platform. And obviously the challenge with that is that there's only a presidential every 4 years, which means that if you have not done the work to win the hearts and minds of down ballot candidates, you go from feast to famine as a platform. And it's very hard to maintain a platform without having continuous evergreen fundraising that is happening at all times. So that's one key difference. The second key difference is that WinRed is a for-profit, which means that they're substantially less transparent in their practices. And that drives, very different behaviors inside of the ecosystem that they're operating within versus inside of Act Blue. In this moment, we are 3 times more effective than WinRed. That is both in dollars raised, but it's also in conversion rates, and it's also in genuine trust that we have across the ecosystem. So all good news there, always things to work on, and I know that we're going to talk about them.
So let me get at some of these annoyances, because a big part of why I'm doing this episode is because Democratic fundraising efforts can be really annoying. I think it goes just beyond the inconvenience. I think sometimes the volume of requests, the feeling that you can't get them to stop, the tone, the tenor, it can feel like almost disrespectful. Or worse, there are these scam packs that raise money, and that money then primarily gets funneled to the people working for these scam packs and not for good campaigns or good causes. What role can Act Blue play in reforming the process or weeding out bad actors?
So let me begin at the top, because I'm certain that for some listeners, they're looking at this and they're getting raging mad because they, first and foremost believe that messages are coming from Act Blue. And so I always have to clear the record at the top and say, Act Blue does not solicit directly, nor does Act Blue sell the data that exists on our platform. What is happening for ActBlue is we become the link inside of the transactional ask that's typically happening on an email or an SMS platform. And because we are such a clear brand inside of that email or that SMS or that text message, we get the attribution for the actual message. That's not what's happening, but I certainly recognize that that is how most donors experience it. And only because I'm the CEO of ActBlue do I actually know the truth of how all of this is working.
So what you're saying is, for people who get a million texts and they feel like they have texted back stop to every campaign or PAC in the history of campaign and PACs, and they want to blame ActBlue because sometimes embedded in those texts is an ActBlue link, you're saying you guys have nothing to do with that. You're not sending those messages.
Well, yes, and because there's two things that just got conflated together here. One is that messages are coming out from 40,000 entities. This other thing is I, Regina, or you, Tommy, are getting messages from 40,000 entities, right? The big question there is, gee whiz, if I only gave to one candidate, how is it that all 40,000 of them have my contact information? And there I say, ActBlue is not giving your information to all of the other entities, but the commitment that we have for every entity that is raising on ActBlue is that the donors that are giving to them is donor data that belongs to that campaign or that entity that is raising on the platform. And there are many that hold that data with a ton of sacred responsibility. And there are also some who sell or give that data away. Now, if I want to be the protagonist in this and in defense of some of those who are making these decisions, the mental mindset is one of many things. One is I am sharing my list with a colleague in another state that I really think is the right person for the role, and they do not have enough donors that they can reach to get the scale of fundraising that they need. And so as a good actor, I am sharing my very, very valuable list with them so that some of those people consider that candidate, right? It is not something that everyone agrees with, right? But in their defense, that might be a reason why that happens. Another reason why that happens might be I have not raised quite as much money as I needed to raise in my campaign cycle. And the list that I have is the most valuable asset that I have as a candidate. So I will make a decision to sell my list to a broker or sell my list to another campaign or sell my list to another, whatever the case may be, in service to paying my staff or in service to paying down debt for my campaign, right? So the intention often is a good and reasonable intention that an entity is trying to act upon. The effect of that on many donors, not all, right? I mean, I want to be clear that there are many, many donors that are like, bring that on, because I want to know.
I don't think there's any donors
No,
that
there
are saying
are.
bring
I
that on.
promise. I promise. I hear it all.
Listen,
the time.
I'm just, as a friend, you're being excessively generous to these campaigns, okay? We get the concept, but no one is like, sell my data ad infinitum. That is a nightmare for everybody.
But let me tell you why I know this is true. Because at least 5% of the time when this occurs, at least 5% of the time, people are saying yes, right? So if everyone hated it, right, it would be we would stop doing this.
I think most people don't know what's happening. I think if people are going to donate to a list that
is true, but that is also different from when it happens, whether I know how it happened or not. Do I say yes to the ask that's being made of me? And different times, different people say yes. So in their defense, all I'm saying is that there are often good reasons for why it's happening. And in 2025, in a world where targeting and messaging can all be much more precisely done than list sharing between candidates or causes, a moment like this creates an opportunity for an Act Blue to innovate and to move us to our next level of efficacy as an ecosystem. For example, those who are listening today may be seeing targeted advertisements on your social media platforms. There you get the benefit of hearing not just flat text message or flat email, but you get the benefit of hearing a video coming from the principal or the candidate who is really making a very clarified bid for what they're asking for. And it's not like 2 seconds of time. It's a rich bit of encounter that you can really take in and be influenced by what's being said. And from there, make a choice to make a donation. This is way less intrusive for many. And what we're finding is that the more candidates that are using these channels that we and other platforms are enabling, the more we're finding that donors are enjoying that a little bit better because it's integrated in with their feeds, right? And sometimes they're into it and sometimes they're not. But if they're not into it, it doesn't interrupt their day. They can just scroll past it, right?
Yeah, they're not opening their phone to a giant picture of Nancy Pelosi being like, Tommy, we're all going to die
Right.
if you don't give me $5 right now.
By the way, absolutely
Yep.
lovely.
Yeah. Well, she is absolutely lovely, but the texts are awful. So in December of last year, a group of like fundraising practitioners and consultants and academics, they wrote this letter to Act Blue with some recommendations about protecting donors from the kind of scam packs, the unscrupulous actors that we were talking about earlier. How can you do that? You know, how can you guys help protect against scam packs? Did you guys find the recommendations in that letter helpful, or were they targeted at the wrong people? Like, how do you think about it?
Well, I mean, I think about it in 2 ways as the CEO of Act Blue. One is any problem that we're having in our ecosystem, I want to hear about it. I'm not one that would bury my head in the sand and pretend that something doesn't exist. Having said that, I have a preference for hearing about it and not posting about it someplace. I find one way to be a little bit more destructive and another way to be much more inviting of collaboration and problem solving. So that is certainly an open letter that I took to heart. Now, let me, again, for those who are new to this conversation and or may not understand all the ins and outs of it, I want to offer that the very naming of scam pack is difficult naming, right? If I were to try to look up what is the formal definition of scam pack, right, it would be hard for me to find an actual definition for what that is. But we do coalesce around a series of practices that make for a good pack with good practices, and a series of practices that lead to a pack that needs improvement. Let me just call that.
Sure.
So when the things that I would name would be, does the pack have a clear identity with a clear social presence that donors can look at and review and understand what is it that they are here to do? That would be one. One would be, are they transparent in how they are spending the dollars that are actually being raised, right? And if it is a PAC that is raising for candidates, what you would want to see is a substantial amount of their spend going to actual candidates. If it is a PAC that is raising for issue or cause or something that is not candidate specific, you would want to see dollars being directed to that very specific thing that they are raising for, and not towards nefarious, unnamed, right? Like, let's call it consultant expenses, right? Where you can't really understand what that is or what it does, right? So that would be, sort of a differential for me between good and bad. There are good and needs improvement, rather, not good and bad. And then there are actual messages, right? So I've heard a lot of people accuse, PACs who are using messages like "act now" and get a $5,000 matching rate, right? There are PACs that use that kind of messaging that are very good PACs, right? They are taking the dollars that they are raising, they are demonstrably putting those dollars into key races across the country, and no one would ever argue about how the dollars are being spent, but they might argue about the aggressive messaging that they're using to get people to act, right? It would be like, again, the rough equivalent of the pastor who is a hellfire and brimstone pastor versus someone who's giving you a little gentle nudge that you should improve the practices in your life, right? Both of them lead to the same outcome if followed, and if you have that belief system, but different people have different preferences for how they hear their information, right? That I would not name as scam, even though some folks might receive it, and many folks might receive it and feel like it is scammy or spammy feeling.
Yeah, that's a really important point, right? You can have a sort of annoying, scammy, obnoxious tone, but that doesn't mean the money is going to a bad place. And look, I have empathy for how challenging the task is of identifying or defining a scam pack. Because let's say we were talking about a charity. If there was a charity that said they were buying malaria nets for kids, but you look at their expenditures and 85% of it is going to a marketing firm or legal services or overhead, and 15% is going to malaria nets, you're like, aha, nope, bad actors, right? But we're talking about political entities seeking political outcomes, and the expenditures could be on marketing or ads or whatever, and look up on the up and up, but they could be routed through an entity that's affiliated with the person that launched the PAC that's doing the fundraising. So they're getting paid that way. And I guess the challenge is like, how do you guys root out situations like that where you have someone who starts a PAC and then pays their own firm a bunch of money and profits on the back end? But it seems like that would be tough for you to know. So
research is an important part of how we think about PACs being onboarded, right? And to be clear, PACs are an IRS designation, right? So there are some PACs that have existed for a long time. There are some PACs that are brand new. And the thing about PACs that have been around for a long time is there's plenty of records to review in the spirit of conducting research to decide whether they should be onboarded. There are newer PACs that do not have the benefit of, years and years and annals of research, right? So provided that they have the IRS identity, right, which that must be there. There are some that we would grant the benefit of time to get up and running. And you can imagine that for a new organization, just like for a startup company, dollars get spent differently on day one than they're spent on day 20,000, right? So we do try to offer some grace and try to get some points on the field to figure out how exactly that PAC will behave. And if we're finding that the PAC's behaviors are inconsistent with Act Blue's mission, right, which is to build technology that shapes democracy and fuels democratic wins, right? If we're finding that there's something that is completely orthogonal to that for the mathematicians on the phone, then that might be the cause for a conversation. Right.
No mathematicians here. Let me tell you.
No mathematicians. Come on. I got
not in this place.
Kids out there.
Philosophy major. Marinate on that. Imagine that was your life. Things went for you.
Imagine. Philosophy was like my third favorite subject.
Oh, boy. I just want to switch gears a little bit, which is President Trump has ordered his Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to go after Act Blue. Republicans in Congress have been going after Act Blue or investigating Act Blue since 2023. It's clear their concern is what we've been talking about, which is that Act Blue has become a great way for Democrats to raise a lot of small dollar money and has been very beneficial to the Democratic Party. But what do you think they're looking for, and what has the impact been on you guys from these investigations or these threats?
Ultimately, what I think that they're looking for is, why are they more effective than we are? And I would probably be looking for that myself if I was on the other side of the coin. But practically speaking, as I said, we've been at our craft for 21 years. They've been at their copied craft for 6 years. And when Act Blue was 6 years old, although we were not mandated from the top down, we were raising around about the same amount, right? So it is not the case that you turn on the spigots and everything just goes, right? There is tremendous discipline in scale and resiliency and all of the things that we have spent all of our time focusing on the back end. And there's also tremendous time that we spend tuning the art of conversions and making sure that we are getting better and better and better with every election cycle. I think that is the heart of the matter. But not being able to accept that reality, of course, we have to get lost in conspiracy theories, right? We have to get lost in well, it must be the case that they're better because of this, that, or the other thing. The most recent thing being foreign nationals who are interfering in the process, right? The data does not bear that out.
I'm not saying he could do this, but let's say Donald Trump snapped his fingers and made Act Blue go away tomorrow. What would the impact be on the Democratic Party?
Well, I think it would be catastrophic, but I also think it's an impossibility.
Why is it impossible? If this is a man who can direct his attorney general to tell the world that him accepting a $400 million plane from Qatar is okay, why couldn't he tell her to take you guys out?
But nothing can stop the president from telling his cabinet to do what he wants to tell him to do. I think there's clarity here that there was not an executive order to shut down Act Blue. There was a memorandum, which is effectively a letter written to the AG to look into the fundraising practices of Act Blue and other fundraising platforms, right? In theory, if there were a real fire, right, that would have been an order, and that order would have been to shut Act Blue down, right? The real thing that they're trying to attack is our efficacy. We stand by our efficacy, and we know that it's 3 times stronger. And that's not a brag. It's just when you're at it for 21 years and when you take your job seriously, that's what results look like. And results matter to Act Blue.
Well, listen, Regina, thank you so much for doing the show. I know you guys are dealing with a lot of stuff in DC, so thank you for making the time.
Absolutely. Appreciate you.